Good evening, I'm Geraldine Sen. On June 15th, ANZ released their economic outlook for Fiji. The 2018-2019 national budget announcement was also made on the 28th of June. ANZ forecasts that the economy is set to grow by 3.3% in 2018 and that budget deficits need to be lowered to around 30%, which is lower than the 47% predicted in the budget. Joining us tonight to discuss Fiji's economic outlook, we have our guest, Dr. KISHTI Sen, who is ANZ's international economist. Good evening and welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
Getting straight into it,
Yes.
What are your views on the 2018-2019 budget?
Well, we've looked at the budget and we've called it as an economic responsible budget, a responsible and credible budget. And here's the reason why we think it's a credible budget. Now, if you look around the economy, you look at the investment side of the equation, there's not a lot of happening in the private investment side of the equation. So what do governments do in order to create investment, keep people in employment, or create even more job opportunities? It has to undertake infrastructure investment. It has to undertake fiscal stimulus. So when I look at the budget, yes, it will be another year of deficit, but governments have consistently run budget deficits for a number of years. So I look at the expenditure components. What is driving the increase in expenditure components? Is it just the government transfer payment, just handouts to people trying to get widespread voting support in order to get a re-election? Or is it capital projects? Or what is it? So we've looked at the expenditure components, we've broken it down, and the strongest contributor to the growth in expenditure is capital capital investment projects. Now, as I said, if the private investment cycle is weak, governments have to be building things, doing things to keep people in employment. And the government's commitment to continue to fund the pipeline of projects that it has promised, we think, ANZ's view is that it is the right thing to do, given the economic situation in the country at the moment, and its commitment to actually fund it makes it a responsible budget. I would actually go far as to say that it is a budget in the economic national interest rather than the self-interest of the government. And if you think about it, the governments can easily cut expenditure. It's very easy for governments to cut expenditure. Now, in an election year, you would think that, look, it'll be harder to reduce the headcount, get rid of people because of the consequences, right? So what do? You cut capital expenditure. That's easier to do. And in an election year, the government could have easily taken the sledgehammer to capital expenditure and present itself as a responsible economic manager. Look, we've got a budget deficit of closer to 30% of nominal GDP. All the ratings agencies would be happy. It nullifies the opposition attack on the government as fiscally irresponsible. But at the same time, people will be losing jobs. So in the interest of the economy, for the government to commit itself to fund the pipeline of projects, I think it's a responsible thing to do. And by not taking the sledgehammer to capital expenditure projects is the right thing to do for the economy in ANZ's view.
Looking at Fiji's past, this is going to be its 8th year of unprecedented economic growth. What
Yes.
factors do you think contributed to that?
Well, if you look at Fiji's economy, you look at the different industry sectors, the key drivers. Where is the growth coming from? Now, the growth comes from the accommodation and food service sector. You got the transport services sector. You got retail and wholesale trade. Now, on the face of it, you might think 3 industry sectors contributing to GDP growth. That's broad-based growth. Now, I don't like that because Fiji ain't got a broad-based economy. Those 3 sectors that I've just talked about are all in some way connected to the tourism industry. Now, tourism industry itself is not represented as an industry sector in the national accounts, but that's the way it is. But the industries which are dependent on the tourism sector are connected to the tourism industry or classified as a tourism characteristics industry are these 3 industries that I've talked about. So Fiji has definitely benefited from more tourists coming to the country. These 3 sectors that I've just mentioned, they have thrived, and as a result, they have contributed to the growth of the economy. And the reasons more tourists are coming into the country is because the global economic conditions are the best it's been in a long, long time. And the US obviously is the key driver of that, but Australia also has 26 years of continuous growth. A lot of visitors from Australia come to Fiji, and New Zealand has a very good, solid growth conditions. An increase in household disposable income, the real increase in household disposable income is what drives people to take those international holidays, and Fiji has benefited. And because Fiji's economy is quite connected to the tourism industry, has grown as well.
Mm-hmm. So looking at the numbers that were released in your economic report, you say that you're expecting the country's economy to grow by 3.3%.
Yes.
How do you come to that figure?
Well, we look at the investment side of the equation because construction, although it's a small sector, it punches well above its weight in terms of contribution to the economy, because construction sector drives lots of other industries in the economy. You know, it draws on the local industries for labor supply and things like that. So, for example, if manufacturing industry will benefit from the sawmilling of timber to provide for the construction projects, and that is the real key driver. So we look at the pipeline of projects, both on the private side and the public side. We say, what is the construction sector doing? And we see a solid pipeline of construction projects coming through. And as they ramp up, that will be the key driver of the economy. And as I've mentioned, the government is continuing with this fiscal stimulus program, building the infrastructure that the country needs, and a lot of it is catch-up investment. And the government will be very happy not to have to spend $190 million on post-construction Cyclone Winston construction and rehabilitation works and build another highway. But it's just the nature of the equation is that the governments have to come in and do it. So a bit healthy dose of fiscal stimulus, pipeline of private sector projects, those will be the two key drivers. And obviously, with good global economic conditions, more tourists coming in, and as we hit capacity constraints in the tourism industry, so tourists, when they have to come here, they don't only have to be housed in hotels, they have to be transported, they have to be fed, they have to be clothed. So all these related industries will reach a point where they need to refurbish, build more in order to cater for the increase in demand. And that will be, we think, will be some of the key drivers pushing the economy forward.
Do you expect these numbers to also continually grow in the next 5 years or so?
Yes, definitely. Because, look, as I said, global economic conditions has best it's ever been. US is the key driver of it. Now, China's growth is slowing, but China growing at 6.9% is still very strong contribution to world growth, because if you think about it, China growing by 6.9% is equivalent to growing by the size of the Canadian economy, the total size of the Canadian economy every year. And Canada is a very advanced, top 20 ranked economy. So that's still making strong contributions, even though it's less than the double-digit growth that we have experienced from China. So an Australian economy is dependent, not really dependent, but benefits from strong Chinese growth, because China still needs a lot of steel to construct its buildings, and Australia has got all the raw materials, coking coal, iron ore, you name it, thermal coal for electricity generation plants. They can provide it. Australia keeps going, and our forecast for real growth in household income is strong. People feel good about their job security, they want to take leisure travel, and they can come to Fiji.
Thank you for that. We'll be back with more after the break. Welcome back. Now, Dr. Sen, we were talking about Fiji's outlook, but what is Fiji's economic outlook compared to other Pacific Island nations?
Well, Fiji has done well, as we just talked about. Has had 7 years of continuous growth. By all estimates, 2017 was another year of growth for Fiji. And if you look at all forecasts that's put out there, most people agree that another 2 years of growth is pretty much locked in. So you're looking at a decade of continuous growth for Fiji, which has basically created 100,000 jobs for people.
And this
that's
is unprecedented.
Good. Yes, I mean, for that long period of growth, I mean, as I said, you know, for an economy constantly hit by shocks, including severe cyclones, drought, storm surges, floods, you name it, to be able to absorb that and continue to grow, it's a remarkable achievement. So, but is it the time for policy makers, people who make decisions at the national level, to sit back and rest on their roles and become complacent and say, look, 3.5% growth is pretty much the norm for Fiji these days. We're doing a great job. Let's just keep it going. I don't think so. I think a significant proportion of the population in Fiji still live below the national poverty line. If you look at the data, the last time we got official statistics on this was back in 2015, when the World Bank said 34% of the national population lived below the national poverty line. You think that given we have had good growth recently, that number would have come down a bit, but you're still looking at a significant proportion of the population living below the national poverty line. So really, in Fiji's interest, it's not good to just sit back and absorb all the compliments that come with the 10 years of success. Right. We have to think outside the box and think about how can we achieve faster rates of economic growth. Because when you do that, you create more job opportunities, and the best way, the best defense against cost of living pressures is an income stream, which you can get once you have employment. So Fiji has to think outside the box and grow a little bit faster. Now, the reason I make this point is that 4,500 northwest of Nadi is a country called Papua New Guinea. Now, Papua New Guinea has recently built a massive $19 billion PNG LNG plant, and that was built by oil majors, including ExxonMobil. So, and in November this year, the APEC leaders meeting will be held in Port Moresby, and Donald Trump will be attending. And you know, wherever Donald Trump goes these days, the eyes of the world follow. So the eyes of the world will be on Papua New Guinea, and it is most likely that an announcement will be made, a final investment decision will be made on the next phase of LNG expansion projects in Papua New Guinea. So we are looking at billion-dollar size projects kicking off from late this decade, early next decade. And that will boost growth Papua New Guinea significantly. We're looking at strong growth for over a period of 10 years, beginning from next decade, early next decade. So it looks like Fiji, if it becomes complacent, its performance will be outstripped by that of Papua New Guinea. And I think it will be outstripped by a significant margin. So Fiji has to actually be more ambitious and aim for those faster growth rates to create those opportunities, because Papua New Guinea will be achieving that. It's good for the Papua New Guinea economy, but that doesn't mean we should be comfortable with just 3.5%.
Okay. Looking at growth rates, of course, you need to look at the labor force rate as well.
Yes.
And currently, with unemployment rate being 4.5%, a lot may say that, well, shouldn't that be a good indicator of economic growth? What do you think that means in realistic terms, though?
Well, unemployment rate on the face of it, if you look at the headline number, 4.5%, it's a good number. You would say, look, we are doing great as a country. We've created 100,000 jobs, as I said, for the last over the last 10 years, which has pushed the unemployment rate down to 4.5%. Now, one of the reasons the unemployment, or the key reason the unemployment rate is down to 4.5% is because of a lower labor force participation rate. This is people who are discouraged, who do not see a future, like in terms of a job opportunity, so they take themselves away from the supply labor force, basically the pool of labor. And the lower participation rate has actually driven down the unemployment rate. It's in some way contributed to the lower unemployment rate. So if the economy was growing a little bit faster, there's more people will be encouraged to enter the workforce, make themselves available to be employed. That will push up the participation rate, and if the jobs are not created to offset that, then the unemployment rate will go up. So I won't actually I will say, look, 4.5% is a good number, but to some extent it's been depressed by a lower participation rate, and the government has to actually try and lift the participation rate.
How do we do that, given that your economic outlook has stated that there's a lower percentage of women that are involved, and you're trying to encourage the government to try to increase that number?
Yes. Well, the thing is, with it will come with employment opportunities. You know, some of the lower female participation rate has to do with the social influences, the cultural influences. Women would just prefer to stay at home. It is just the nature of. But things are changing across the world. More and more women are into part-time employment, and this taboo that, you know, women should stay at home and raise their children, it's not there anymore. So I think if you change the way people are able to work, create more part-time employment and things like that, more women, and the economy is growing, people will see an opportunity to find employment, get an income stream, they will be attracted into the workforce, and that will lift the participation of females.
With the new incentives that have been put in place in the new budget, especially with maternity leave being increased to 98 days, there's also an introduction of 5 days paternity leave and 5 days family care leave. There wouldn't be any room for anyone to say that women shouldn't be joining the workforce now, because they do get time to spend with the family, but then get back into work. Yes,
definitely. I mean, that's the trend across the world, and we're in some way just playing catch up to that. So I think those initiatives are good initiatives.
You don't think, though, that this is going to in any way impact productivity levels?
No, I don't think so.
No?
No. I don't think it will have a drastic impact on productivity, no.
Okay. And what do you think about the government's idea of increasing medical and life insurance for civil service and welfare participants in the country?
Well, I think some sort of income security is a good thing for the vulnerable people. So I think the government have got limited resources. The government will be happy to provide for everybody and provide a lot more. But Fiji is a small economy, it's got limited resources, it's got to balance vested interests, budget deficit implications, political consequences of the decisions they make. So, you know, for some assistance to the most vulnerable people in the community, I think it's a good thing.
Right. I'd like to explore a little bit more on the actual budget deficit itself and how you could probably improve that later on.
Yes.
But we'll be back with more after the break. Welcome back. Now, Dr. Sen, looking at the budget deficit, it's also, again, a deficit this year. A lot of people may be saying, why is it that the government is always running on the budget deficit? Why are we still losing money? Could you explain exactly what a budget deficit means?
Well, I don't think it's fair to say that the government is losing money by running a budget deficit. What it means is the government is spending more than what it's getting in terms of its revenue receipts. So, as I said during the beginning of this program, given the situation in the economy, yes, budget deficits is the right thing to do for now. And if you look back in time, historically governments, because Fiji is a small economy, small pool of resources, but there's a big demand on government services and projects, it has run deficits consistently for a number of years. Now, budget deficits have gone up, but it is the right thing to do. So the deficit in terms of just a definition of it, it's the government spending more than what it gets in terms of revenue.
And looking at the percentage of debt that we have right now, people may say that it's still quite large. How do we reduce that?
Well, as I said, you can actually have a lower deficit. You don't spend as much, but then there'll be people losing jobs. You won't be creating any employment. So this is the right thing. Now, I'll take back to people what Australia did when we had a financial crisis back in 2009. Now, what Australia did was they ran a very strong fiscal stimulus program. Now, Australia did not have a financial crisis, but it had a credit squeeze in the sense the banks who were funding a lot of their loans, but were borrowing in the offshore capital markets, their cost of funds went up. That was the only indirect effect that was impacted on the Australian economy. Australia did not have a financial crisis, but what it did is because they ran a very strong stimulus program. So the go hard, go early, go households was the mantra at that time. They put money into people's hands to go and spend, kept people in the retail sector employed. Everyone who was losing a job in the mining sector was getting employed as a builder in the construction industry, because all the schools were building a new hall, and they had some ping bed insulation schemes, things like that. So it put a lot of money into the economy. Now what it did was it kept people in employment. Now if people were not in jobs, they would not be able to meet the house loan mortgage repayments. And as a result, they would say, look, I'm not able to service my debt, I'm just going to give it back to the bank. They were doing a massive collapse in house prices, and we would have had a financial crisis back home in Australia. It was stopped by those fiscal stimulus programs. So this is the alternative that the current government faces. It's either you run a strong counter-cyclical fiscal stimulus program, or you see people losing jobs. And I think, given the situation on the private side of the investment cycle, I think it's the right thing for the government to do.
Of course, looking at increasing revenue for the country, not just increasing jobs, but there's other ways to increase that as well, looking at the tourism sector as well. And how do we go about marketing to Fiji better? Right now we've had a record number of visitor arrivals coming in, not only from Australia and New Zealand, but also from the US.
Yes, because in the US, the economic condition, it's as good as it's ever been in a long time. Now, the US economy was already very strong before Trump got elected. US, the Federal Reserve in the United States, was already on the way towards raising interest rates. And why would they raise interest rates? Is because inflationary pressures were coming through, and inflationary pressures come through when there's capacity constraints in the economy. So the unemployment rate was getting close to its full employment level, and the Reserve Bank, the Federal Reserve was concerned, and they said, look, inflation will come through, we'll start raising rates. And then Trump got elected, and he came through with his own fiscal stimulus. And he announced tax cuts, and he said he would roll out a strong pipeline of infrastructure projects as well. So economy was strong already, and on top of that comes Trump's fiscal stimulus via tax cuts and infrastructure spending. The economy is as good as it's ever been, and it's a key driver of global growth. So households experiencing real growth in their income, and they're taking international holidays, and Fiji is benefiting from it as a result.
Well, we can already see that consumer spending has increased. Right now people are owning a lot more cars because new duty has been reduced on most of the hybrids that are coming in. People are also spending much more, not only on their cars, but also on houses, on everyday spending as well. Do you think that with the tax threshold being increased to $30,000, that's a good thing?
Yes, it's a good thing, because look, at the same time, people are always complaining that there's cost of living pressures. I've been having cost of living pressures. The government, given its limited resources, I keep going back to this, because the government doesn't have an abundant supply of money in order to provide relief for people who are facing hardship in terms of cost of living. So by lifting the tax threshold to 30,000, a lot more people are not paying any tax. It puts more money into people's pocket, which they can spend, and it creates activity in the economy, which is a good thing. So And the government has already reduced VAT, is provided assistance with taxi, bus fares, as well as school fees and things like that. So these are the ways that the government is doing with its limited resources to help the people who are vulnerable. And I think in terms of the revenue foregone, we are looking at something like close to 25, 26, maybe 27 million. The revenue will be foregone by lifting the tax-free threshold. And the government obviously has done its work, and it thinks that it's comfortable with that.
Looking at the inflation rate, it's been forecast to 2.8%. Sorry, it was forecast in 2017, 2.8%, and for 2018, it's been forecast for 3%.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a good rate?
Well, you know, with inflation, you've always got to be careful in terms of what you're looking at. The headline rate will always jump up and down, bump around a bit, and it's primarily driven by a couple of things. So you always have to strip away the extreme changes in prices, and then look at the underlying, the broad base of the trend growth in inflation. And if you look at underlying inflation, there is no inflation. It's under control. If inflation was about to get out of hand, the Reserve Bank of Fiji would be increasing interest rates. And to me, I don't see any reason why the Reserve Bank should raise, because inflation is fairly benign. It's driven, yes, the headline rate is high, but it's driven by things like carbon prices, alcohol and tobacco prices. You strip that out, underlying inflation, which is the broad-based growth in prices, it's well within range.
You think it's sustainable for the next few years as well?
Yes.
At the same rate?
Yes, because the economy is not going to grow at such a fast rate instantly that will create capacity pressures and higher prices.
Well, thank you for that comment. We will be back with more after the break. Welcome back. Now, Dr. Sen, looking at how to increase economic growth in the country, how would we achieve that?
Well, there's an election coming up this year. You know, I would like to actually solve all of Fiji's problems, but I can't. With an election coming up, I think it's an opportune time for politicians to think about, okay, how can we make the economy grow faster without adding inflation, without creating inflationary pressures? And one of the things that because Fiji has got only a population of about 1 million, there's a small domestic market. So you have to look externally in the sense that, okay, is there some external demand that exists which is not met? And I think Fiji has got a very good asset that not a lot of people actually talk about, and it's our ability to speak good English, and we are a relatively fairly educated country, population-wise. So I think there is an enormous potential to export education, and there is a growing middle class in China, in India, who want to get English-speaking degree qualifications. So I think that is an area which can be tapped into, and I think the politicians should actually think about to making that feasible. And with elections coming up, I think it's the right time to actually think about these things and take it to the people and make up the mind in terms of what they think is the best thing for the country. Well,
looking at government's policy, in this new budget, they've said that they're going to be awarding scholarships to civil servants, and that would obviously help in a situation like this. Yes,
so obviously. I mean, like, I think personally we may be producing too many teachers, but you know, the more teachers, it's better. And I think creating some colleges where we teach English, things like that, can only flourish.
Also about increasing remittances to Fiji, how do we go about doing that?
Well, you got to send people overseas to go and work.
Train professionals, or maybe even looking at our base right here. We are a rugby nation. We have a lot of star athletes.
Yes, I mean, like, Fiji has got a long tradition of exporting talent. Now, it's not only just the rugby players. Rugby players have only recently come on board. They're playing for very good clubs overseas. They're getting a lot of good money, and they're sending it back home, and a lot of the family members are benefiting from it. They're having a better standard of living as a result of it. But Fiji has been sending peacekeepers abroad for a long period of time. We've sent aged care workers, before teachers, nurses, economists, if you like. The country is benefited because people send money back. It improves activity, improves the lives of a lot of people. So the thing is, going forward, now we've got lots of good vocational colleges in Fiji. As I said, Papua New Guinea is going to go through a construction boom. They'll need a lot of workers. They imported 15,000 labor from the Asian countries to build PNG, LNG. And they'll need labor force, or more than that, in order to undertake the construction projects which are coming up in the beginning of the next decade or late this decade. Fiji can supply a lot of that labor. It's not, everyone cannot just go to university, become a teacher, doctor, or nurse, or things like that. If you pick up a trade qualification, there's opportunities in Papua New Guinea close to home, right at a doorstep, and that will boost remittances and create demand.
Well, we've looked at tourism and we've already looked at labor. What about the agriculture side of Fiji? How do we boost that? That side of the sector, or that sector, has pretty much been dying for the past couple of years.
Is there a potential in agriculture? I don't really think so. I mean, I think we've sort of missed the boat on the sugarcane. Yes, it still employs a lot of people, but the sugarcane industry, if you look at it, we are so far away from our main markets. Just getting sugar from Fiji to the European markets or wherever we want to send it, it's just going to be so much costly in terms of transportation costs. Do we have the latest machinery, the technology in order to do these things? I'm not really so sure. So, and the other thing that concerns me is the skill set. I think with there's such a big, gap in trying to sort of maintain sugar industry at the peak. It's been lost, and with it has been the skill set. So the young people coming up these days, agriculture, I come from a farming family myself, and agriculture is hard work. Sugarcane farming is hard work. You only get paid when the cane payments come in, but it's a hard slog throughout the year. So it doesn't appeal to the young generation these days. So I don't think there's a skill set there to really boost agriculture, but in my view, I think it's not even an industry that's worth sort of pushing.
But that's just looking straight at sugarcane. So what about the other products that are being exported right now? For example, we've got a lot of ginger, I think, and we've got pineapples and all sorts of fruits and root crops that are being exported. Yeah,
I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing because that helps small businesses, it helps supply to the major producers, manufacturers. And one thing I've noticed, having lived overseas for quite a while, is that even though people migrate from Fiji to go to live in Auckland or Sydney, they still love local food. There's as much variety as you can get in the supermarkets. They still love their taro, their cassava, their roro. So there is the potential to export a lot of agricultural produce to our neighboring countries in order to meet that demand.
What about looking at kava, for example? Prices have significantly increased following Winston. Do you think that there's also a potential to sort of exploit that market as well, to sort of increase our exports of that?
Well, prices are really a function of demand and supply, and the middlemen sort of come into the play as well in terms of the profiteering that they're making. But look, if you increase supply, the prices will come back to something that's more representative of the market. So if you can boost supply, it's good.
Looking at the manufacturing and industrial side of things in Fiji, there's so much potential that's yet to be tapped into. How do you think government can actually look into developing that?
Well, the government used to give a lot of grants, assistance, tax-free zones, things like that, incentives for manufacturing to happen, but those incentives have been taken away, and as a result, it's not as competitive to actually produce things in here. China obviously is the workshop of the world these days, and it's moved across to the other countries like Taiwan, Vietnam, even Bangladesh now. So actually, potential really for manufacturing, I kind of not really.
Not
sure
quite so much, especially looking at, say, for example, got the garment industry, which is pretty much just dying away right now.
Yeah, that's because the government has taken away all the benefits that are available to it.
So what would you recommend, or what would you say, in your opinion, would be the way forward when it comes to that? Maybe telecommunications? Yeah,
ICT definitely is potential as well. If we have developed, if we can have reliable and secure internet facility, we can provide a lot of back office operations for large multinational companies that India and Philippines does at the moment. And as I said, look, we've got educated population. English is strong for a country, and I think we can actually provide this labor to actually meet some of those services.
Well, Fiji being the hub of the Pacific still nowadays, how do you think we'd be able to partner with, say, for example, our our Pacific partners to sort of increase trade?
Well, so if you look at Papua New Guinea, you should be talking to the people you've got a construction boom coming up. What are your capacity constraints? Where do you need help? How can we actually provide some of this, because we are the neighbors, we belong to the Pacific, we've looked after each other for a long period of time, we should be the first one to sort of come in and help. So my first port of call would be a phone call to the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, Peter O'Neill.
Okay, and also looking at next year that's coming up, with elections coming up, or even looking at recent trends of the weather being the way it is, do you think that anything major could happen, in your opinion?
In terms of what?
In terms of, say, for example, with elections coming up, people may start thinking that, a new government might change something, economic growth may slow down.
Yeah. Well, look, it's not for me to make a judgment in terms of who should be in government.
In your opinion, though?
In terms of, well, look, we work with the government of the day. The governments come in and they make policy decisions, we'll trace the consequences. We are not here to take sides of either the government or the opposition or the independents. We're here to take trace the consequences of economic policy decisions and take it on all the way to the economy, and then we have a form of view based on facts. And it's for the people of Fiji to actually make the decision when they do vote at the elections in terms of who they prefer to be the government.
Well, thank you for that. We'll be back with more after the break. Welcome back.
Yep.
Now for our final segment, just to touch back on the inflation rates and looking at our foreign reserves.
Yes.
It's at a manageable level right now.
It's very strong levels, very healthy levels. I think in the budget there have been some announcements, there have been some relaxation of exchange controls, which basically tells me that the reserve banks come from where the reserves are at, the full level of foreign reserves are at, and I don't think there is any risk that there is going to be any devaluation or anything like that in the near future.
And what about your takeaways from the budget and, of course, what Fiji's economic
Well,
stance
the key
is right now?
takeaways in terms of the summary points, I think for Fiji as a whole, it's done remarkably well over the last 7 years. There's a couple more years of growth to come, but it's not the time to be complacent. I think for Fiji, it's the time to become ambitious and aim for those faster growth rates that the country, I think, needs in order to lift more people out of from below the national poverty line to above the national poverty line. So that's something that people can think about. Political parties can think about when they go to the election. So it's to become ambitious is good. And how do you achieve faster growth rates? I've already sort of talked about, exporting the education is one of the things that we talk about, but that's not everything. There's other options that the political parties can think about. And I would actually encourage whoever is in leadership of this country to have a very close relationship with Papua New Guinea government and see if we can actually meet some of the constraints that they will have when they go through this massive construction boom from early next decade. I think there is real opportunities there for not only for the people of Fiji but also for businesses, because businesses can actually have a strong relationship with PNG and actually flourish from their growth, because I'm telling you, it's going to be massive.
Okay. And also looking at the political situation at PNG, some might say that it may not be the right time to look at it, but that's, of course, just the political side. Economic-wise, it's a good idea.
I say to all our clients all the time, I say, look, if you want to learn about Papua New Guinea, don't go to Google, because that will just lead you astray. I've been to Papua New Guinea, I've been to Port Moresby, and I've seen it firsthand, and in terms of the potential for the country going forward. And of course, not everything is dependent on the mining sector. They've got a very strong agriculture sector. Everything that the world needs, like coffee, palm oil, cocoa, they've got it. So Papua New Guinea has got a lot going for it, and I think with APEC meeting in November, there will be a lot of focus on Papua New Guinea, and I think investors will be trying to get in to develop some of the resources, develop the agricultural sector and the manufacturing sector, because they've got gas in Papua New Guinea. So I think there's definitely potential there. Look, the other thing is Papua New Guinea has actually shown to the world that they've built a $19 billion LNG plant already by a major oil player in the global market. So it's already demonstrated. So I won't worry too much about the negativity that's out there about the Papua New Guinea. I'm actually quite bullish. Yes, it's going through a soft period at the moment because of the foreign currency shortages, non-mining business investment is weak, the government is up against its debt threshold of 35% of GDP. It doesn't really want to borrow more money to prime the economy, but it's doing the best it can. There's no risk of a recession or anything like that. The economy is still growing, but beyond this next 12, 18-month period, I can see very strong growth coming through and the country benefiting as a result.
Looking at numbers in the next 5 years, how much do you think the economy would be growing by on a yearly basis?
So look, we go out to the next 2 years, and I think, as I said, the 3% growth for the next 2 years pretty much just locked in. If you look at the pipeline of projects in the private sector, the government doing its bit, and world economic conditions good, tourists coming here. We actually, at the moment, have put all our eggs in the tourism basket. But as I said, the policymakers should actually think about making the economy more resilient and not actually just rely on tourism in order to drive growth. So 3%, like when we look at 12 to 18 months, 2 years, it's kind of locked in. And that's as far as we go in terms of projecting the economy forward. We don't think it's a very long-term view, but that's the current stance.
And in a nutshell, just looking at policies that have already been put in place in the new budget, you think that this would help that?
Like, for example,
well, looking at, of course, we've already talked about the tax incentives. We're looking at increasing revenue using ECAL and all the other fiscal policies that are in place. Looking at increasing, of course, the workforce with the YES initiatives that are in place, and of course the increasing education as well to empower those to go out and seek work.
Yeah, with the limited resources, it's doing the best it can. As I said, look, the main thing that we look at is capital expenditure program, and as I said, private investment is soft. Government at present cannot afford to be cutting its private capital expenditure or taking the sledgehammer to public capital expenditure, just to correct myself there. And it's not doing it, and I think for that the government should be commendable, and I think continue with this stimulus program and get the economy growing.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for your time on the show.
Thank you.
That wraps up our show for tonight. Until next time, have a pleasant evening.